Alright, hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. It's been a little while since I've seen all of you. School's just been so hectic. Last night, technically today, I went to bed at 5:30 in the morning and then got up at 8, so I am on less than 3 hours of sleep, but it's okay. As you could probably tell by the title, I really wanted to talk about the prioritization of lust over love, especially in a gendered society like we live in. I was very passionate about this topic like a week ago when I first started brainstorming, but with the inauguration of Donald Trump and his rise to once again become the president of the United States, I'm more interested in talking about politics and stuff. So if this video is a little rushed or not up to par, that's probably why, because I'm working on others that for me have more priority. But since I've already written out a very long 6-page script for this, I figured that I would film it. I would like to note that to prepare for this video, I read All About Love by Bell Hooks, and it is an incredible book. She's an incredible thinker, author, activist. I would totally check her out if you've never heard her before. So when we talk, I would like you to think of this as a conversation between 3 people, me, you, and Bell Hooks. Before I start off, like usual, I would like to clarify what I mean when I say the prioritization of lust over love. So firstly, I want to talk about the fact that modern culture is just absolutely saturated with sex. So for example, in non-pornographic films, sexualization is still rampant. In literature, the rise of smut, smut is tremendously more popular than books without it, and even in everyday life, references to sex have seeped in. So for example, there's a bar that I frequent, and it has a whole list of shots titled things like porn star shots, screaming orgasm, blowjob shots, and obviously they're very funny, right? I won't lie, I find them humorous as well, but it begs the question as to why it's so normalized, right? Even in things like makeup, eyeshadow palettes, lipstick shades, they all have sexual innuendos. So I think it's definitely something to think about, the fact that we are just so surrounded by sex all the time. Situationship culture has also exploded. Now, I can't remember if they were a thing 10 or 20 years ago, probably because I was quite young, but I do feel as if the more I mature, the more common it is to see people in situationship relationships. I saw a quote the other day that read something like, sex is the most physically intimate thing a person can do with another, and this generation has turned it into a hobby, and I think that really encapsulates the way that I feel about situationships. I'm not an old-fashioned person. I don't think that sex should be saved for marriage or any of that stuff, but I do think that sex should be saved for love, because emotional labor has always been a weight that's rested on women instead of men, and because of this, women are disproportionately affected by situationships. And the idea that someone is allowed to, for lack of a better term, have access to your body without allowing you access to their kindness, their vulnerability, their affection, their trust, it's just a very horrifying reality to me. And I don't find that things like situationships are liberating. I think that this is myth, and I don't think it's true at all. The normalization of things like porn and sex work are also very important to this conversation. Obviously, the act of deliberately consuming a piece of media that's intentionally sexual in nature isn't inherently the problem, but rather the fact that aside from the obvious idea that porn promotes unrealistic body standards and unrealistic standards when it comes to sex, the porn industry really does play into the objectification of women, and a massive amount of porn depicts unsafe sexual practices and romanticizes things like, underage sex, fetishization, abuse, rape. The porn industry, it's such a horrible place, and yet we have so many young men out there who take what they see online and try to replicate it in their own bedrooms with the woman that they're supposed to love, which obviously is so messed up when all of these images that they're consuming are saturated with violence, cruelty, and unfair treatment. The massive rise in women and girls, and especially young girls, doing, indie sex work on sites like OnlyFans is also a huge issue in my opinion. Sex work is undeniably real work, but when every other influencer on the internet does OnlyFans, and you see more and more young girls just starting an account as soon as you turn 18, this is unacceptable. This is a catastrophic thing, right? I'm only 19. I feel so much older than I was a year ago. I can't imagine what I would be feeling right now if I had started an OnlyFans. Additionally, as a girl, as someone who's not very tall, as someone who feels like I wouldn't be able to fight off a man if I was jumped on the street, I feel unsafe walking around at night. And if I had to deal with the fact that there were thousands and thousands of men consuming images of my naked body every month and spending their hard-earned money on me. Like, I couldn't imagine walking around in the street. Like, I would just look at every guy and I would feel so paranoid, like 100,000 times more than I already do now. And I feel like there are so many downsides to indie sex work that influencers don't talk about. They just talk about making money fast, and obviously getting rich is very important in capitalist society, but there are more important things than that, and people, I feel, don't realize it anymore. That's probably like the most I'm gonna say about these two issues of porn and sex work. I might touch on them slightly in the video, but I won't go in depth. If you're interested in all of the thoughts I have on the porn industry and sex work and stuff, which I have very, very many, I would totally be down to make another video about it if there's enough interest. But for now, specifically, I would like to talk about lovelessness through the lens of sex and, you know, other stuff. And as a general guideline, this video will touch on topics of love and gender, the fear of trust and intimacy, the relationship between love and power, love under capitalism, and men and love. Through the conversation, through all of these topics, I will connect them back to the topic of lust and sex. So if this sounds interesting, please keep watching. Just keep watching. Starting off strong with love and gender, love has traditionally been viewed as a female domain because women are often characterized as being very gentle and being lovers, right? And I honestly believe that this view is what's allowed situationship culture to just flourish. The idea that women are biologically designed to take care and love others means that men who partake in situationships don't really feel bad or believe that they're doing anything wrong because they're aiding in women fulfilling their biological purpose. So under this perspective, female resentment and protests against unfair treatment isn't really taken seriously because women, you know, are meant to love. They're not meant to think. On the flip side, men are built for things like leadership, for thinking, for rational decision making, and they're equipped with very strong emotional regulation that leaves no desire for love, which in the eyes of capitalist society is basically a plus, right? And because you have these two dichotomies, women are basically like meant for love, they don't think. So when a woman tries to speak out for herself, you know, she's diminished by this view. Obviously the view of like woman lover, man don't need love, is very, very harmful also to the man who will suffer his whole life believing that love is below him. Love, real love, is never below anyone, but it is a very, very difficult thing. So Bell Hooks, she writes, to truly love, we must learn to mix various ingredients: care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. Now, for men raised in a world that's characterized as women from Venus, men from Mars, they're not really taught this criteria. In its place, they're fed a very steady diet of like, show no emotion, love is for sissies, like yada yada, this type of very harmful rhetoric, and it allows them to believe that love comes second to things like material wealth and public success, right? Obviously, this is not true, but the fact remains that men not only have to overcome an internal barrier of realizing that love should be in their lives, that love has a place in their life as it has a place in everyone's life, and then realize that they must actively fight for that love every single day, which is an incredibly exhausting realization, but one that I do believe most women grow up with, ingrained in them because of the societal differences on how we raise girls and boys. So Hook says that we continue to invest in the fantasy of an effortless union, but ultimately this is not true. She says, quote, love in action is always about service from both men and women, but this truth cannot be recognized when women are always seen as the caretakers. She writes, when romance is depicted as a project, or so the mass media, especially movies, would have us believe, women are the architects and the planners. Men are far too comfortable letting women handle all of the work emotionally and just doing nothing, which is why no strings attached sex is so popular. Lust is a more than ample imitation of love, one where instant gratification and pleasure are available basically effortlessly. So isolated sex ensures that the men who take part in it don't have to confront the biases or harmful beliefs that they have deeply ingrained in them. So whereas love is very hard, lust is easy, and instead of focusing on this fact, men simply push the work of love onto women. Hook says, it is so easy for all of us to forget the service women give to others in everyday life, the sacrifices women make. Often sexist thinking obscures the fact that these women make a choice to serve, that they give from the space of free will and not because of biological destiny. By hiding behind the excuse of masculinity, men deprive themselves and of women of love, and then seek to fill this void with the exploitation, the sexual exploitation of the very girls that society tells them they're supposed to protect. The patriarchal idea of like the alpha male has also made it so that so many men are scared of the trust and vulnerability that are literally required for love to truly flourish. So about this, Hooks writes, the practice of love offers no place of safety. We risk loss, hurt, pain. We risk being acted upon by forces outside of our control. So to men who are taught that power is like the most important thing to possess, this is horrifying, unfathomable, like unthinkable, because they can't comprehend the idea of emotional intimacy because it's just never been taught to them. To feel their emotions is less of a virtue and more of a weakness, a behavior that paints them as inherently feminine. And as I'm sure many of us have already heard, the biggest fear for a man in a patriarchal world is to be perceived as feminine, as a woman. I would love to go into that if this idea needs clarification. I also find that too often men who have been wounded by their first love often just turn inward and refuse to do the work to heal. So instead of reflecting and allowing themselves to feel their own heartbreak, as very many women do, they become convinced that, all love is a farce, that all women are evil, and that vulnerability is basically just a scam that never works out. So all too often, they have a craving for attachment and for human connection, as most people do, and they turn to sex to fill it. When they find themselves in a position with a woman who loves them, they are all too happy to help her fulfill her carnal desires. But when she asks about going further to talk about emotional desires, emotional work, right, men often find themselves so horrified because, for better or for worse, sex is a physical act that can be done without really any intimacy. But relationships, or at least working relationships, strips both partners of any falsities or fronts to expose basically the weak and broken parts underneath that a lot of men are scared to face. So ultimately, there's just no hiding in love, and for men who have never ever been taught to accept themselves, this is like the worst possible fate. Far too often we hear men say things like, I need sex, but we never really hear them say, I need love. I think that this is a really interesting parallel because no one really needs sex. Of course, sex can be a craving, and it can be a very, very strong craving, but at the end of the day, no one is dying if they don't have sex, but people can and do die from a lack of love. Unlike sex, love has the very unique power of saving lives, but to accept this is to accept the possibility of pain, and when it comes to men who have been hurt in the past, accepting the fact of their previous failure. Hooks actually has something incredibly profound to say about this. She said, individuals who want to believe that there is no fulfillment in love, that true love does not exist, cling to these assumptions because this despair is actually easier to face than the reality that love is a real fact of life, but it's absent from their lives. Too often men who have been previously hurt will develop a very deep sort of hatred, one that they turn both inward and outward. And too often you see men who hate themselves so badly with such passion that they will go out of their way to harm women who dare to try and love them. And sex is just one tool in this arsenal of like weapons they have against them. No man who truly respects a woman will feel comfortable using her love to manipulate her into having sex with him, or have the stomach to do it over and over again with different women. But this is a situation that happens every day, multiple times a day, with so many women. I personally have met so many men who are just completely like disillusioned to life, to the point where they tell me things like, I walk into a room and I look at everyone and I feel like they're out to get me. And when someone talks to me or treats me with kindness, I feel betrayed or cheated because I was expecting meanness. I can't imagine living closed off to everyone and just refusing to heal for so many years. But there are genuinely individuals who feel like this. And I think that this fear that's been normalized and accepted just plays into the myth that lust is an apt replacement for love, which obviously absolutely is not. These type of men view the world with a dog-eat-dog type of mindset, and they bring this hierarchy to their own relationships because they have a need to dominate. About this, Hooks writes, in the Mars and Venus gendered universe, men want power and women want emotional attachment and connection. On this planet, nobody really has the opportunity to know love, since it is power and not love that is the order of the day. The privilege of power is at the heart of patriarchal thinking. So this is very obvious in situationships, but I feel as if this behavior is actually best exhibited in committed relationships. In an ideal relationship, there are no secrets or uneven standings in a partnership. But more and more we see that the label of a relationship doesn't stop a man from hiding himself away and using his partner to fulfill his own emotional and sexual needs while not really giving anything himself. Hooks writes, many men, especially, often turn away from true love and choose relationships in which they can be emotionally withholding when they feel like it, but still receive love from someone else. Ultimately, they choose power over love. So men who are unable to relinquish the urge to dominate will succeed only sexually because, in the bedroom, it's quite easy to maintain power, to chase your needs and maybe your partner's, but, even in porn, we see the emergence of a subdued woman who experiences pleasure when she is hit or denied pleasure, paradoxically. But this cannot be the sole dynamic in a relationship. It shouldn't be a dynamic in a relationship, right? It's just not healthy, and a good relationship won't flourish when it's uneven and when women are being put down constantly. In the last chapter of her book, she finishes off with this quotation. She says, "We cannot know love if we remain unable to surrender our attachment to power. If any feeling of vulnerability strikes terror in our hearts, lovelessness torments." Female identity, on top of everything, may also have a part to do with this. Traditionally, in a relationship, a man leads and a woman follows, right? A man brings the money and a woman stays at home to watch the children. So this dynamic ensures that a man will never ever willingly relinquish power to a woman who he is taught to view as inferior, but this is what a relationship demands. So Hooks writes that love will not prevail in any situation where one party, either male or female, wants to maintain control. But nonetheless, we see that it is far too often easier for men to just turn to lust instead of grappling with his fear of trust, his need for power, and his inability to view women as truly equal. So this sexism, don't get me wrong, is likely unconscious, but it's present nonetheless. I'm not making a claim that, men suck, right? Obviously, this is not the issue, but the fact is that a lot of men, if they can't even do the work to heal and to love themselves, they're not going to be able to do the work to look inside them and think, what have I been taught? That's unhealthy. What has the patriarchy ingrained inside me? Traditional societal dynamics are inherently sexist, and relationships built on these will always either be unfair or falter, or probably both. However, there's also more to a relationship than, patriarchal man-woman dynamics. There's more to our society than the struggle with gender, right? We also live in a struggle between two classes, the upper and lower classes, of, sustainable living and capitalism and all of these different economic systems. So the economic system that we live in, however, survives via commodification and consumerism. So instant gratification is basically everywhere. On our phones, when we doom scroll, we get an instant hit of dopamine, right? Which does mess with our dopamine receptors, but it's fun. In shops, where spending money instantly brings us joy, we're stimulated again, and even in other people, we look for this instant gratification. Too many men will deny a woman the chance of being his partner if she is just not willing to give up the gift of sex immediately. They're led not with their hearts, but with their sexual desires. And, if a woman isn't as sexually pleasing as he sees online, then he searches for someone else who can fulfill that space in his bed better. If a woman is not sexually as skilled as he wishes, he goes and finds another partner that perhaps can practice the trade in a way that is more pleasurable to him. Partners in this world are reduced from partners into sexual machines that can be discarded and replaced at will, because it's just what a culture of constant consumerism has taught us is possible. Hooks writes, "This is the outcome of living in a culture where the politics of greed are normalized. Treating people like objects is not only acceptable, but required behavior. Under capitalism, slow relationships are basically frowned upon, right? Like profit, it's expected that the benefits of a relationship be reaped immediately and instantaneously, and can only be given or accepted in a transactional manner. The lone wolf mindset cultivated under capitalism has only exacerbated the idea that people don't owe anyone anything, and that life is a race to the top. Another reason that lust is often prioritized over love." So I've already talked in this video, mentioned briefly how men would prefer to pursue wealth and societal standing than love, right? Because they're taught that these things are more important than love and more important than relationships. So Hook has a lot to say about capitalism. She says the principle underlying capitalistic society and the principle of love are incompatible. I have many thoughts on capitalism. Hooks definitely has many more thoughts on capitalism that are much better than mine. If you are interested, she has a chapter on her book just dedicated on talking about love and capitalism, so you should definitely check it out if this fascinates you. The objectification of women obviously plays a huge part in this. Porn has made the sexual woman into a commodity to be both bought and sold instead of respected, and sex is no longer seen as a form of like human connection or intimacy, but rather a simple right. There are so many men out there who will treat you very nicely and who will play up the idea of a gentleman because he likes being a good man because it makes him feel good. But there are a lot of men who treat their girlfriends so nicely but are so incredibly rude and mean and dismissive to other women, and this is not a sign of respect to their significant other. This is rather a sign that he truly does not see women as people or equals or anything outside of the sexual value that they bring. Therefore, it's no wonder that men often find it really hard to maintain relationships with exes, female exes, because their relationship is built solely on sexual chemistry and not anything like personal relation. So too often you hear statements on TikTok, I think, like, I like her too much to jerk off to her or something, and these are said with pride, as if not viewing women as a sexual object, not sexualizing her, not thinking of her in a way that she hasn't consented to, is something that should be celebrated and rewarded. For a man to unconsciously view a woman with respect and as a person places him in the minority of the male population and not the majority. So one way that I think that this is exemplified is in relationships without men. So lesbians very famously are able to stay friends with their exes, and I think personally that this is because they view their girlfriends as people first and sexual objects second, unlike men who prioritize lust and view women as sexual exploits first and people second. I focused a lot on men in this video, but mostly in the way that their behavior affects other people. Now specifically, I would like to talk about men in respect to themselves, you know. Of course, this is a double-edged sword. I find that the acknowledgement of male struggle under patriarchy often opens up the floor to like an influx of voices that claim that men are the real victims of patriarchy, that their struggles are more valid than women, you know, that their stories are drowned out by a torrent of female struggle. Obviously, this is not true. And I do find that insecure men possess the very special talent in being able to find victimhood in any situation or scenario when they are present. Nonetheless, however, I would still like to speak about the male experience without buying the notion of ultimate male victimhood. When men are unable to love, they block themselves off from like real relationships. This is very obvious. I'm not saying anything that's new or radical. However, by using an endless amount of women for, you know, easy and uncommitted sex, not only do they harm the woman that they deal with, they do harm to themselves. They desensitize themselves to the positives of sex, to possible sexual connection and real sexual intimacy. They ruin both their image of women and their chance at finding love. Hooks writes, we do not become fully human until we give ourselves to each other in love, and men deny themselves this opportunity and this possibility when they prioritize lust over love. So throughout All About Love, one of the core themes that Hooks writes about is love as a choice. You know, she really wants to express the fact that you don't fall in love. It's not an involuntary thing. You have to actively choose to be better, to love, because it's a very hard thing to do. So she quotes psychiatrist M. Scott Peck, who says, "We do not have to love, we choose to love." So the prioritization of lust over love has basically irreparably damaged a generation of people and will continue to damage more people if something isn't done. On top of everything, it continues the objectification of women and the pattern of male isolation and emotional immaturity, which backfires on the men themselves and the people that they surround themselves with, women. It creates a space for sexual coercion and abuse in a society that punishes, I think, genuine people. I focus this video primarily on men because of my own experiences and the experiences that I'm very conscious of, for example, the experiences of my friends. But this dynamic has taken place many times with the genders reversed. This is not just a male issue. The prioritization of lust over love affects everyone, and yet I feel like it's rarely talked about. At the beginning of the book, Hooks starts off by quoting American poet Diane Ackerson, who writes, "Love is the most important thing in our lives, a passion for which we would fight or die." I think that we should need to start living like this, with the fact that love is important and we can't continue to push on pretending that there are other things more valuable than love, like money, social status, things like this, and that lust is an ample replacement. It's not. You cannot live a life without love, and I think more people need to realize this. Okay, everyone, I cannot lie, that was kind of a weak ending, but this is where I'm going to stop the video. If you like this video, I am begging you to like and comment. This video took me actually an absurd amount of time. I think I spent 2 days reading all about love, and then I wrote out a 6-page single-spaced 12-point font Times New Roman Google Doc as a script for this, which I have had on the side of my screen and I'm looking at. I filmed 3/4 of this video a few days ago in a library, but I got kicked out because it was closing. So this is the second time that I'm trying to film this video. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching that video. This video, it is currently 11. I got kicked out of my building because they closed. But I like this video. I like the things I talk about. If you do, you should help me spread it around so it doesn't get lost in the internet. So that's all. Thank you so much for watching, and I am sure that I will see you all again.